What if I told you that I died? My heart stopped. My body became motionless. And while here on earth the doctors saw no more hope, my soul was taken to a place where no lie could exist. There, before him, my entire faith was stripped bare. Every belief I had defended, every sacrifice I had made, everything was exposed. And that was when Jesus showed me the truth about tithing, a truth that broke me inside because I realized that my giving had never really been about him. It had been about me. I never imagined that one day I would be here, sharing something that would completely change my view on faith, giving, and the true purpose of serving God. What I am about to share is not just another story. It is an experience that transformed every aspect of my life. My name is Margaret. I am 72 years old and live in sunny Florida. I retired a few years ago after a lifetime dedicated to work and family. I have always been a woman of faith, raised within the principles I was taught since childhood. Church was an essential part of my routine, and tithing was an unquestionable commitment. From a young age, I learned that giving God the first 10% of everything I received was the key to securing his blessings. And so I did. For decades, I gave faithfully. Even when money was tight, when my health failed, or when the future seemed uncertain, my tithe was never missing. I believed that this obedience made me a better servant, someone God would look upon with favor. But deep down, there was an emptiness I couldn't ignore. My spiritual life felt mechanical. I prayed, but the words came out as lifeless repetitions. I read the Bible, but the verses didn't touch my soul. I followed every teaching, yet I felt like something essential was missing. In the silence of my heart, I would ask myself, why, despite doing everything right, did God still feel so distant? But before I continue sharing my testimony, I want to know, where are you listening from? I want to feel this message reaching far and wide, crossing borders, uniting hearts that seek the truth. Even if we are far apart, we can feel close, connected by faith and the desire to know more about God. Write in the comments where you are from, because this message is for you, wherever you may be. Sunday started like any other. I woke up, got ready, and went to church, sitting in the same pew as always. The choir sang passionately, their voices filling the air with hymns that had long been familiar to me. Everything was just as it had always been, part of the routine I had followed for so many years. That morning's sermon revolved around a recurring theme, tithing. The pastor spoke with conviction about the importance of giving God the 10th of all we receive, quoting scriptures I knew by heart. "Let us be faithful in giving, for those who give will be greatly rewarded," he said, as the congregation responded with, "Amen." I had heard this message countless times before, and once again I reassured myself that I was doing my part. But that day, something felt different. As I listened to the words from the pulpit, a discomfort stirred within me, a quiet unease. I closed my eyes for a moment, and a thought gripped my heart. Does God really want this from me? Has my giving been just a mechanical act, without life, without true meaning? A strange feeling washed over me. I was doing everything right. I tithed faithfully. I participated in church activities. I followed every teaching. But then, why did I feel so distant? Why, despite all my efforts, did God seem so far away? I had no idea that what seemed like just another Sunday would be the day everything changed. As I left the church that morning, I continued my routine as usual. I got into my car, started the engine, and began the drive home. The day was clear, the traffic was smooth, but my mind was still stuck on the questions that had arisen during the sermon. Something inside me wasn't at peace, but I couldn't quite understand what it was. And then, it happened. It was an instant, a second that changed everything. A deafening noise, the sound of twisting metal, shattering glass, and an impact so powerful that it ripped me out of my thoughts. My body was thrown forward, my vision darkened, and the last thing I heard was the screeching tires on the asphalt before everything went black. Suddenly, the pain, the fear, and the chaos disappeared. I was no longer inside the car. I couldn't feel my body. I couldn't hear the sounds of the street. There was no more fear or confusion. Instead, I was enveloped by an intense light, but it wasn't an ordinary light. It was alive, pulsating, and carried a peace I had never experienced before. It wasn't just something I saw. It was something I felt in every part of my being. The feeling was indescribable. Time seemed to have stopped. I didn't know where I was, but somehow I knew I was no longer in the world I had known. The pain, the worries, the weight of years of doubts and fears had vanished. All that remained was that light, that peace, and the certainty that something far greater was about to happen. The light around me was so intense that it seemed endless, yet it didn't blind me. It surrounded everything, pulsating gently as if it were alive. My body, or what I still understood to be my body, felt weightless. There was no ground beneath my feet, yet I was standing. The silence was absolute, but at the same time, filled with something I couldn't explain. It was as if every particle of that place vibrated with a presence I was still trying to comprehend. And then, he appeared. At first, I didn't see him with my eyes, but I felt him, a presence so powerful that my very being seemed to shrink before him. Then, when I finally lifted my gaze, there he was. He was not like the images I had seen all my life, nor like the paintings or illustrations in the church. He was something infinitely greater. His garments flowed as if the very light emanated from him. His face carried a radiance beyond description, yet it was not something distant or unattainable. He was real. So real that everything else I had known, everything I had lived, seemed like a mere shadow compared to him. My heart tightened. I wanted to run to him. I wanted to hide. I wanted to speak. But none of those things were possible. My legs simply gave way, and I fell to my knees without even realizing it. My chest burned, and for a moment, I felt an overwhelming weight, as if my entire life were being laid bare at that very instant. I knew that nothing was hidden from him. Every thought I had, every intention, every moment I had done something out of pride and not out of love, every time I followed a ritual without truly feeling his presence, everything was there, laid bare before him. And then he spoke. His voice was like thunder, yet at the same time, like a whisper that touched every part of me. They weren't just words. It was something that pierced through my soul and became deeply embedded within me. "Do you know why you are here?" My heart raced. I wanted to answer, but how? I knew that any word spoken to him had to be the absolute truth. But what was that truth? I thought I had lived righteously, that I had followed the rules, that I had been faithful. So why did that question make me feel like I was standing before something I had never truly understood? The answer didn't come immediately. Instead, a deep fear settled in, not the kind that paralyzes, but the kind that makes you realize that your entire life may have been built on something you never questioned. Something was about to be revealed, and I knew that after this, nothing would ever be the same. As soon as that question echoed inside me, the silence around me shattered. Suddenly, I was surrounded by something that felt more real than any memory I had ever had. It was as if I were inside an endless room, standing before an invisible screen, watching my life unfold before my eyes. But it wasn't just remembering past moments. It was reliving them. I felt every emotion, every intention, every thought I had in each scene. I saw my childhood, the first moments I learned about God, the innocent prayers, the days when faith was simple and pure. Then the years passed quickly. There I was, now an adult, dedicating my life to everything I had been taught was right. I saw every time I entered a church, every offering I placed on the altar, every check I wrote to ensure my faithfulness to God was documented. At first, everything seemed right. I saw the times I helped the needy, the hours I spent in meetings, the moments I sacrificed my own comfort to follow what I believed was my mission. But then, I started to notice something I had never seen before. I saw how I felt when I gave my tithe. The pride that swelled in my chest, knowing I had never failed God in this area. The security it gave me, as if I were building up spiritual credit, as if my financial faithfulness was a guarantee of blessings. I saw the satisfaction I felt when I heard sermons about prosperity, because I knew I was doing my part. And then, the shock came. Jesus allowed me to see not only my actions, but the hidden intentions behind them. I saw the times I gave not out of love, but out of fear of losing something. The moments I gave expecting to receive. I saw how many times my offering was mechanical, given without a single sincere prayer accompanying the gesture. My heart sank as I realized that while my money was on the altar, my heart was far from it. A deep pain overtook me. Not because I hadn't given enough, but because my giving had never truly been a reflection of my love for God. My faithfulness had been an obligation, a ritual I followed without questioning, something that made me feel spiritually secure. But that was never a true act of trust. I saw the coldness with which I had often approached my faith. How much I cared more about being right, about following the rules, about ensuring that I was doing everything correctly, more than I cared about truly knowing His heart. And in that moment, standing before it all, a crushing truth became clear. My giving meant nothing if my heart did not fully belong to God. As I was still trying to process everything I was seeing, Jesus stepped forward. His presence was so intense that I felt every word He spoke, not just with my ears, but with my very soul. Without condemnation, but with piercing truth. He spoke words that completely shattered the way I had always viewed tithing. Tithing was never about money. The words resonated inside me like thunder. What? I had spent my entire life hearing that tithing was exactly about that, about giving the correct 10%, about being faithful so that the windows of heaven would open, about planting so I could reap. But then, Jesus continued, "It has always been about trust." At that moment, everything began to make sense. Tithing was never about accounting. It wasn't a celestial bill that had to be paid every month to guarantee protection and prosperity. God never needed my money. He wanted something far greater, my heart, my trust, my genuine surrender. I saw how, throughout my entire life, I had treated tithing like an invisible contract with God. I gave, expecting something in return. Even though I never said it out loud, deep in my heart, I believed that my financial faithfulness earned me spiritual rights, as if my obedience guaranteed that God would do His part. But there, standing before Jesus, I realized that my faith had been contaminated by a transactional mindset. God never asked for an exchange. He asked for a relationship. In that revelation, I saw how many times I had reduced faith to a system of giving and receiving, without realizing that the true purpose of tithing was to reflect my dependence on Him. If I truly trusted God, my giving should have been natural, not a burden, not a sacrifice made out of obligation or fear. My eyes were opened. I had spent 72 years of my life thinking I had been faithful, when, in reality, I had just been trying to stay in control. Because giving without expecting anything in return required something I had never truly offered before a total surrender. Suddenly, the light around me shifted. Everything around me seemed to expand, and I was enveloped by an atmosphere beyond human description. What I saw next was beyond any dream or imagination. The heavens opened before my eyes. What I beheld was so intensely beautiful that it seemed impossible for the human mind to comprehend. The colors were more vibrant than anything I had ever seen on earth. Golden, blue, and silver tones flowed as if they were alive, and the very air felt charged with a joy that words could never explain. There was a song. But it wasn't like the hymns we know. It was something greater, something that came from every direction at once. The sound was pure, perfect, as if every particle of that place was worshiping. I didn't see a choir, yet I could feel that all of creation was part of that heavenly melody. And then, I saw the people. Their faces radiated a peace and joy I had never witnessed before. There were no signs of pain, fear, or worry. They weren't bound by possessions, status, or achievements. There was no anxiety about the future, no sorrow over the past. They were completely free, living in a state of love and worship that seemed to be the very essence of that place. Jesus drew near, and without saying a word, I understood. This was the life he had always wanted for us, a life without chains, without material worries, without the need to try to earn blessings. Here, no one gave to receive. Here, everything was a voluntary offering, a natural overflow of the love that filled every being. For my entire life, I had been concerned with doing everything right, making sure I was financially faithful so I wouldn't lose God's promises. But now, standing before the reality of heaven, I saw how small my perspective had been. What God wanted from me was never just what I could offer. It was who I became in Him. I remained there for what felt like both a second and an eternity, absorbing every detail, feeling that freedom. My heart burned with a deep longing. How could I live like this while still on earth? But before I could fully understand, the scene began to change. Something different was about to be revealed, and deep inside, I knew that not everything I was about to see would be as beautiful as this place. Suddenly, everything around me changed. The radiant light, the celestial songs, and the indescribable peace vanished in an instant. What had been brilliance and harmony was replaced by something oppressive, overwhelming. A piercing cold ran through me, but it wasn't the kind of cold felt on the skin. It was something that seemed to pierce through my very soul. Around me, a dense darkness stretched endlessly, but this wasn't just the absence of light. It was the absence of everything good, the absence of life itself. And then I heard it. Screams, deep agonizing cries, echoes of souls torn apart by despair. They weren't just coming from far away. They were coming from everywhere. Some voices begged for mercy. Others only wept endlessly. But there was something even more terrifying than the screams, the feeling of absolute emptiness. The pain of that place wasn't like physical pain on earth. It was torment of the soul, an unbearable weight, as if every being there was trapped in an endless cycle of regret and hopelessness. But it wasn't a regret that brought change. It was a suffocating remorse because in that place, every opportunity had been lost. Jesus was beside me, and even without words, I felt His sorrow. I saw familiar faces. People who had once sat in churches, who had listened to sermons, who had made promises. People who, like me, had followed rules, but had never truly surrendered their hearts. They weren't there because God rejected them. They were there because they had spent their entire lives rejecting God. Then Jesus spoke, His voice filled with love, yet carrying a weight I had never felt before. This is what happens when you live only for yourself. His words pierced me like a sword. I saw people who had trusted more in their own works than in a relationship with God. Others who had lived bound by wealth, status, and pride, thinking they were secure, but never allowing God to truly transform their hearts. And I saw those who, like me, had believed that simply giving was enough. As if they could buy their way into eternity, without ever truly knowing the one they claimed to serve. I wanted to look away. I wanted to escape the vision. But Jesus wouldn't let me turn my eyes away. It was as if he was showing me the true weight of an empty faith, of a heart that had never fully surrendered. There, in the midst of that darkness, I understood something that words could never explain. God never wanted what I could give. He always wanted me, my trust, my surrender, my complete offering. And as this truth sank deep into every part of my being, I felt something pulling me back. Hell was not my destiny, but I knew this vision would never leave me. I knew this revelation wasn't just for me. It was so that I could testify to the world that the worst prison isn't the lack of material possessions. It's an entire life lived far from God. The darkness around me began to fade, but the weight of what I had seen remained upon me. My heart was pounding, my soul trembled. I didn't know if it was fear, pain, or a profound awakening. I only knew one thing. Nothing inside me was the same anymore. Then Jesus spoke again. His voice, firm yet filled with love, cut through the silence like a sharp blade. "Will you live for me, or will you continue as before?" The words were simple, but they carried a weight I could never ignore. There was no middle ground. There was no more room for a lukewarm faith. I knew that this question would define everything. For a brief moment, my mind tried to hold on to what I had always known, my old religious commitments, my faithfulness in tithing, my constant presence in church. Wasn't that enough? But before that doubt could take hold, I already knew the answer. I had seen the truth. I had understood. My whole life I had followed rules, but I had never truly surrendered. I gave to God what I thought He wanted, but I had kept for myself what He truly desired. My heart. There were no more doubts, no more reservations. My knees hit the ground, tears streamed down my face, but this time they weren't tears of fear or guilt. They were tears of surrender. With a trembling voice, yet with absolute certainty within me, I spoke the words that would change everything. "Lord, I choose you." At that instant, an invisible weight lifted. The sense of freedom that rushed through me cannot be described in words. It was as if I was breathing for the first time, as if, finally, everything made sense. Jesus smiled. But it wasn't an ordinary smile. It was a smile that carried a promise, an acceptance, an infinite love that I had never fully understood before. And then, without warning, the light around me intensified. I felt as if I were being pulled back, as if I were being returned. My time there was ending, but my life was just beginning. I suddenly opened my eyes, as if I had been pulled out of a deep sleep. The first thing I felt was the weight of my own body. The air rushed into my lungs, as if I were breathing for the first time. My heart was racing, and the brightness of the room blinded me for a few moments. Then I heard voices, people moving around me, monitors beeping, a murmur of surprise and disbelief. "She's back!" My vision slowly returned, and I saw stunned faces staring at me, doctors, nurses, and, in the corner of the room, my family. My body was still in pain, and every movement seemed to require immense effort. But something inside me was screaming that I was no longer the same person who had entered that hospital. One of the doctors approached, still in shock. "You shouldn't be here. The impact you suffered. There's no explanation for how you survived." I heard him, but I wasn't surprised, because I knew. I knew that the real miracle wasn't physical. Yes, my body had been restored, but what had happened to me was something far greater than anyone there could understand. Lying in that hospital bed, surrounded by machines and bewildered gazes, I felt a deep peace. Not because everything was resolved, but because something essential had changed within me. But then came the second wave, the weight of understanding. The images I had seen, the words of Jesus, the revelations that transformed everything I had believed. How could I live normally after that? How could I explain something so vast with words so limited? I wanted to get up, I wanted to shout to the world what I had discovered. I wanted to tell everyone trapped in a mechanical faith that something far greater was waiting for them. But at the same time, a subtle fear arose in my heart. How would people react? Would they understand? Or would they look at me the way the doctors were looking at me now, with amazement, but also with disbelief? I didn't have all the answers. Not yet. But one thing I knew. I would never live the same way again. Something had awakened in me, and I could never ignore what had been revealed. Now, I needed to figure out how to live this new truth. And more than that, I needed to find a way to share it with the world. The following Sunday, I went back to church. My body still bore the signs of the accident, but my soul was more awake than ever before. I entered the temple as I always did, sat in the same pew as always, but something inside me was no longer the same. The service began. The hymns were sung. The prayers repeated in unison. Everything was familiar. Everything followed exactly as before. But now, with eyes that had seen the truth, I noticed something I had never seen so clearly before. How many people here were just following a ritual, just as I had done. The pastor stepped up to the pulpit, opened the Bible, and began to preach. And then came the words I knew so well. Tithing is the proof of your faithfulness. God blesses those who are faithful. I felt a tightness in my chest. Before, this phrase had brought me comfort, security, the assurance that I was on the right path. Now, all I could hear was a weight, a demand that didn't reflect the true surrender Jesus had shown me. I looked around. People were listening attentively, some nodding in agreement, others already pulling out their tithe envelopes. I saw hands lifting offerings, but were their hearts truly surrendered? I remembered Jesus' words. Tithing was never about money. It has always been about trust. But there, in that moment, I knew that few understood this. Many, just as I once had, saw tithing as a spiritual bill, a payment for blessings, a guarantee that they were right with God. But how many were truly surrendering their hearts? The unease grew inside me. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to say that God didn't want their money. He wanted them. I wanted to shout that the true offering wasn't the amount placed on the altar, but the willingness to fully trust in Him. But I couldn't. A wave of fear came over me. What would happen if I spoke? Would they listen? Or would they call me a heretic, a rebel, someone trying to weaken the church? I remained silent, my hands trembling. I left that place carrying a heavier burden than when I had entered. I knew the truth. I had seen the truth. But was I ready to share it? Was anyone ready to hear it? Inside me, a fire began to burn. I couldn't stay silent forever. I needed to find a way. But how? In the days that followed, a silent battle took place within me. I could no longer tithe the way I used to. Not because I didn't want to give to God, but because now I understood that He didn't just want a portion of my money. He wanted my entire life. For the first time, I asked myself, what does it really mean to give? Before, I placed my tithe in the envelope every month, left it on the altar, and felt like I had done my part. But now, I knew that wasn't enough. God wasn't looking at the numbers. He was looking at my heart. And that's when something changed. I started giving differently. Not just financially, but with my time, my love, my attention. I began to notice the people around me. I saw those who needed something far greater than money. I saw the lonely widow whom no one visited. I saw the unemployed young man who didn't just need an offering, but someone who believed in him. I saw the single mother struggling to feed her children, but who carried an even heavier burden in her soul, guilt and fear of the future. And for the first time, I started giving. Not because it was a duty, but because my heart burned with compassion. I stopped seeing tithing as a number and started seeing the people. I began to help in ways I had never considered before. Sometimes with money, yes, but other times with a hug, with a listening ear, with words of encouragement. And that's when I realized something wonderful. The more I gave, the more I received. Not in material riches, but in joy, in peace, in fulfillment. The people around me began to notice this transformation. Some asked why I had changed. Others were inspired and started doing the same. Small gestures began to impact lives, and I finally understood what Jesus wanted to show me. Giving was never about exact amounts or fixed rules. Giving is an act of love. Giving is trusting. Giving is surrendering completely, without holding anything back. My life was never the same again. I didn't stop giving. On the contrary, my generosity multiplied. But now, it wasn't a burden, it wasn't an obligation, it was a privilege, a reflection of the love that God placed within me. At first, talking about what I had experienced seemed impossible. How could I explain something so deep? How could I put into words an experience that transformed my soul? But something inside me wouldn't let me stay silent. I couldn't keep that truth to myself. I started slowly, talking to close friends. I sat down with people I had known for years, brothers and sisters from church, and I tried to share what Jesus had shown me. But, to my surprise, not everyone was willing to listen. This can't be right. Tithing has always been a command from God. Be careful not to stray, Margaret. You're playing with something serious.